And one of the literal examples was a guy who said, yeah, the kids from our school went to a high school, and when we asked the high school what's the biggest difference between our kids and kids coming from other schools, and the guy from high school said, well, what's the biggest difference is they come in and they start working. They get into the classroom, they get their stuff and they start working, while all the other students are sitting there waiting for the teacher to come, and if he doesn't say anything, they don't do anything. Their kids started working because they had their own goal. They knew why they were there and what they wanted to get out of it. So they didn't see the point of slacking for the first 10 minutes and then having homework. So again, this skill and this attitude part really helps. The practice is that CITO scores won't be a problem. We are tracking CITO scores. They will be doing the intermediate CITO tests. We will be testing them, and we will make sure that they are far above grade. They're far above average. For the school and for the type of student that your kid is. So we are tracking those to make sure that also, according to all regular standards, they will be outperforming regular kids. We're not going to not put an emphasis on it. We believe there's a different route to it though. That recycling all the knowledge is not the best way to up the scores, but it's better to up their skill and up their attitude and then offer them the knowledge. That'll up their scores. So is that... Yeah, definitely. Actually, we're doing that in a better way than most schools, because most schools, what they do is they say, if this kid has done the 150 pages of the math books, then we'll give them a check for having done the math books. Even though if his score is low, then we'll accept that because he's done the math book. While we are actually constantly testing, is he scoring? Is he actually competent in this area? Which is actually a completely different standard, which is a lot higher than most schools work with. We are committing ourselves to either setting up our own high school. We are having talks about doing that and making that possible in this region, or finding a high school to work with. And we actually have 2 high schools that already have expressed interest, saying, I think your concept does align with ours in some ways, so we could find a way to actually have a bridge from your school to ours. So we are actually looking into that. The question is, if the kid gets IPC here, does this translate to IPC in a different country or in a different school or in a different place? Two answers. On one hand, there is a difference between the IPC curriculum and being an IPC school, an international school. So no, we're not an international school. We do use the curriculum. The challenge with the curriculum is that it's modular and every school picks its own roadmap through that. So it might be that the module we just did will be the one they start with at the next school. So there's no real way of preventing that. On the other hand, the learning framework that's underneath it is the same. We will be testing the same way of developing skills. We will be testing the same way of dealing with the content. So those skills are transferable. So it's not seamless, but it is within the same philosophy. And that's why we also have more elaborate IPC training by the trainers who also train international schools to make sure that we do get that philosophy right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, the question is, so it is going to be a Dutch public school. Yes, we are going to work at teaching your kid Dutch as much as possible for the time you're here. If you're here for 2 years, you could still opt to do that, but then it might be make more sense to go to an international school where you can keep in an English language system, which also makes transfer to another international school easier. So that is something you'll have to weigh yourself for the period you're here. Like the duration might make a difference in that. That we can only limitedly help you with. Yeah. Okay. Over there.
I have a question. How quickly is the school going to expand to up to group 8?
It's going to expand at the rate of the kids growing older. The group 5 that's going to start, the 8-year-olds, are going to go 1 year at a time, getting older.
The reason I'm asking is we have 3 children, and the youngest can join in 2 years' time. The middle one can join straight this summer. But then I speak with the school. The school cannot take the children who is about age of 9. And it's very difficult to have 2 or 3 different drop-off locations in the morning. So I was hoping if I put the middle one here, from the starting point, will that be possible to grow quickly, or the group 7 and 8, or it takes more than 2 years?
Now, well, there's 2 things that we have for that. One is we did say group 5. That's what we're going to do. The question is, are you going to grow faster? So we can have other kids getting in at group 7 or something. The same thing still applies that we want to have 4 years with a new kid. We want to have at least 4 years to have a kid have use of the transformation to a different system, because it's going to be a shock for kids to go from one system to another. And I don't think we should want to do that to a kid, to change him, and as soon as we're done with it, change him back to a regular system. So we're not going to catch up. Even people side entrance, even if we have group 7, 6, 7, 8, it's going to be the question if we're actually going to allow people to come in sideways. So we're not going to do that. We're pretty strict on that. We did set the limit at group 5, which is a technical definition where some 9-year-olds are eligible for group 5. That depends on the date of birth and stuff like that. You would have to request that specifically. But we have been asked a lot for exceptions, and we have really fundamentally decided not to make them. I'm really, really sorry about that.
Well, it's just because the IPC has been used in many of the bilingual schools in the Netherlands, not only in School of Understanding, but some other schools also are using it. And then they are also not single school. So maybe it's not as trouble as you think when they transfer from one school to the other.
I completely believe that you can go from one IPC school to another, but our classroom management system, having kids, allowing them to have a responsibility to pick their classes and to go through it at their own pace, is quite a fundamental shift from pretty much any school you'll find in Holland. It's a shame. I'd love for it not to be such a big difference, but I'm afraid it is. If you have very elaborate personal questions about your school, then I really would like to urge you, there are cards here with our email address, make an appointment. So we can have like a specific parent talk about your kid to have more elaborate questions. I will try to focus mostly on what is useful for entire group, because there are 60 people here with a lot of questions. So I'm trying to manage that as well. Who's going to finance this school? It's a public school. A public school is financed in Holland by the state. You get a per student fee or a stipend kind of tuition. So that's the way it's financed, yeah.
What's the number of applications so far?
The number of applications so far, 150. We've got about 150 applications, of which, because they are voluntary, we can't demand it, our assumption is we'll start between 70 and 80 students, and with about 25 kids in daycare from 0 to 4. The long-term plan is that we're going to go to somewhere about 300 and 400 students in a period of about 4 or 5 years, which is a decently sized public primary school in Holland. Yeah.
How many children are in class?
How many children are in a class? Well, like I tried to explain, we don't have this strict classroom system, but a teacher-student ratio will be between 25 and 28, because that's what the schooling system is funded on. It actually is a standardized calculation system where you get funding for between 25 and 28 students. It'll be slightly higher in the beginning, but that's what it's going to end up with. Yeah. Shh. There will be some classroom assistance, yeah, and we are looking at making the most of that in combination also with the after-school care. That the after-school care people come 2 hours earlier, so there will be an overlap so they can support in the classroom, also allowing teachers more one-on-one time with students for coaching talks and stuff like that. Yeah.
From previous experience, you said one of your slides said that 8% of the kids adapt well to the system. What happens to the 20%?
Question is, in one of the slides I said that within about a year, 80% of the kids adapt well into the system, into high self-reliance. Other kids are less self-reliant, so they need more coaching and more guidance. And yeah, they stay in the system, they just take a longer time to develop the skills. It only has to do with the amount of time they take to develop the skills. So they might be in the self-reliant category, which gets a pre-made roster or pre-made planning for the week. They can't create it themselves, but if you give it to them, then they'll be fine. So they get more coaching in doing that, and still we stimulate them to be even more self-reliant, and even then they'll be way more self-reliant than an average school, but they take more time getting to the fully self-reliant stage. That's really a difference between, some kids are more talented in being self-reliant than others.
One more question. You use a lot of, you will be using a lot of tablets and multimedia. One of the young kids who get addicted to that?
Okay. One of the questions is, you get a lot of tablets and laptops and stuff like that. Are you actively doing stuff to prevent kids from getting addicted or something like that? For us, the digital devices are a means, not an end. So it's not the goal to have these kids like 8 hours a day, you know, zoning out behind these devices. Our rough estimate is that we should have a max hour and a half, 2 hours a day of screen time. And things like the research project should have using these devices to look something up and going back to a group process to do something with it. But not all sitting there behind their laptop typing like 4 hours in a row or something. So yeah, that's definitely something that we're mindful of, that the kids should see it as a means as well, not as their ends. Yeah?
How you plan to communicate with parents and via which channel and with what frequency?
Yeah. In what way are we going to communicate with parents? We've got an online system that you guys can log into, so you get information on just day-to-day stuff. We've got email information, which will probably roughly be weekly or bi-weekly. We're now looking at organizing monthly evenings with a psychoeducation thing, with communication. So those are a number of the channels we'll be using, but this is something we'll have to develop together. It's always hard to predict that, because some parents are really happy when you do a lot, some actually get kind of annoyed with it after a while if you do it too much. So this is kind of a balance that we have to find together. Yeah.
Given that you already have more applications than the intake that you're planning, what will be the selection process or criteria?
There won't be a selection process. If there are more students, we do have a backbench of teachers that we could call upon if there were to be more applicants. So we don't have a number of fixes or any kind of limitations in that. We do, applying for the school does not automatically mean that you'll be accepted. We do have a selection process where our prime question is, will this kid benefit from this type of education? And there are some things, like if your kid is really like medicated HDAZ, for instance, then it's a question whether it's good to have a self-regulatory environment where he's left to his own devices more. While with other kids it might be brilliant. Some kids actually, when you give them that environment, they learn it. So that's why. We don't screen on medical behavior. I'm just trying to give an example. We will have an in-depth conversation with either the principal or the head teacher, with you, with your kids' presence, to have a communal discussion of, will this work? And if they have worries, they will express them to you immediately so you can talk about it. It's not some official screening process. So it's just a matter of me trying to demonstrate on one hand unchangeable features that don't fit in the school system, then we shouldn't want that for your kids.
For any other school?
Yeah. Well, we do have, like in some areas, we can really accommodate kids a lot more than a regular school. For instance, the fact that they can be, you can be a 6-year-old working on, math, 9-year-old level, but getting a 5-year-old's guidance in self-reliance. There's no school that can do that. But other schools might be a lot better at providing a clear, structured environment that never deviates, if you talk about more artistic behavior, for instance, with complete rest and no distractions around. That's something we can't offer. Our school system, we offer rest, we offer discipline, but it'll never be as quiet as a structured classroom environment where everybody has to do the same thing. So we have to see if that's a fit with your kid.
Is it open for children who live outside the Amsterdam?
Yeah, it's open for kids. We've got kids from Amsterdam, from Hoorn, from a lot of places. Yeah.
How will you ensure that there will be
Yeah. 2 months ago we didn't have an answer because we didn't know. We actually have 10 kids in every age group already, pretty much. So it's pretty spread out, and it's pretty evenly between boys and girls as well. There's no real extreme things in there as well. So it's already set that there's enough peers in any area. Yeah.
How many hours of physical exercise do they get?
How many hours of physical exercise do they get? I couldn't answer you, to be honest. Please email that question and I'll forward it to the person who's making the planning. Yeah.
Question? In your slides, you currently only have 5 teachers, and you have 5 groups. How the teacher can do the individual coaching for the kids?
Actually, we have 5 teachers and 4 groups. So that's one. We've got 5 teachers and 4 groups, so we already have extra there. The other thing is that the groups are relatively small. Like I said in the beginning, we've got a 1:25, 1:28 ratio is normal. But when we have 80 kids, it's 1:20. So you could opt to divide the kids over 3 teachers and then you've got 2 left. We've got classroom assistants who can take over classrooms in parts of the day. And also, we don't work with the class system. They're not all 28 sitting in the same room at the same time. So when one half of the classroom is self-reliantly working, the teacher can sit there with 4 kids around the table to have coaching talks with the 4 of them. And also there's time, for instance, when they get physical education, there's a moment that the entire classroom is taken to the gym, but that's the moment that the teacher doesn't have any classroom responsibilities. So that one could be used for a different class to take 1 or 2 students out to help. So we've got a lot of things like that going on. We get a number of volunteers as well, teaching specific classes. So we create a lot of those moments. And also the classroom management system, for instance, in the research groups, is mostly self-reliant work. So then you've got less teachers. You've got 3 teachers walking around to make sure that everybody's doing their work and getting their questions answered. But then we still have 2 people who can pick one at a time kids out of it. If you spread that over 5 days, you can speak to most of them in a week.
What if a kid or a parent doesn't want to do the CITO tools, or if he doesn't care, doesn't want to put any importance on the CITO tools? How do you feel about that?
What if the parents don't want to put any focus on the CITO tools? We don't want to put any focus on the CITO tools either. We want to assess whether the kid is competent in the areas that he needs to learn. We will do the CITO tools in the minimum amount of time, once every 6 months. So it will be negligible how much time that takes. This is a requirement because it's what we need to be able to report to the school inspection agency. So we need to be able to report and to justify that our school is a safe school to go to. And you need some kind of official measurement, and that's why we picked the most generic method that can be found to make sure that we can appease all the powers that be that need to decide whether a school is safe to go to. But it's not a prime way of deciding whether our quality is right. It's just a way of making sure that we can assure both you and the public at large that we are doing our job correctly.
You described a system that is different and novel to a lot of us. Where has it been applied before, and how do you know it's going to be successful?
Yeah, a number of places I've seen it. In Den Bosch there's a school called De Wittering. I've worked with the lady who set that up, and I've seen that school. We've had discussions on it. I've talked with the guy who set up the original Ouderavond school before it became like the franchise, which didn't always end up very well, but the first one actually did a really good job and delivered kids really well. Had a lot of talks with him about that. I've looked at schools in the US. My colleagues have been to different schools in the US and Australia. So yeah, we've looked at a lot of different systems in different ways.
But you're taking little bits from various systems and you're now putting it together, or this is one taken exactly from somewhere else?
It's basically a combination, because the ones I just described all look reasonably similar. They've got reasonably similar approaches with variations. So we've made a joint variation of that. So in that way, it is not copying it, but it is a pretty reliable system that we're taking on.
Absolutely, because I'd like to check out the other schools that you said are using something similar.
Yeah. Yeah, please email then we can connect you.
About warm lunch, are you planning to hire catering or?
That's the discussion that's going on right now. We're going to have it externally done or internally done. Ideally, in the end, we would like it to be part of the lesson plan, that the kids actually are part of making the lunch, but that's at some points maybe a little bit ambitious in the beginning. So we're going to do it take step by step. So most likely it'll start being catered and slowly we'll move into doing more and more internally.
Is it correct that the school is also opening in Amsterdam West? Because I'm there.
Yeah, we've got discussion with two schoolbesturen, they call it in Holland, in Amsterdam West and Amsterdam East, to open schools. And in West it's pretty certain that we're going to start in the coming year. But there's no guarantee, like that's still in the discussion phase, so that would be announced after the summer holidays.
Can you elaborate the classroom system, how you organize the separation of the
The question is about classroom management, like how do you separate onderbouw, bovenbouw? Basically it's those three groups again, right? The development group, you'll be part of a group with a rough age range of 3 years, being together, and those will go together throughout most of the school period. The learning groups will be solely developed around the level of competency of your kid. If he does math at 8-year-old, he will be instructions together with other 8-year-olds. If he does that 6-year-old with the level that the Dutch system would call 6-year-old, then he'll be with those. But it'll be different ages, but always the same content level. But it might be that he's doing math at a 9-year-old level and he's doing language learning at a 7-year-old level. So that will be solely aimed at his competency level. The research groups will be reasonably homogeneous, like with a 1 or 2 or 3 year range, so roughly the same age, but then mostly aimed at having the same interest. If they've got a research topic they want to work on together, that's going to determine which kids are going to work together. So yeah, it's kind of different than a regular system, but then you've got an idea of how, based on what principles we put those groups together. Yeah.
Do you expect a 4-year-old and 8-year-old in the same?
No, because that's why I'm talking about a 2 or 3 year old gap, and that will be selected on them being able to work together in a useful way. We're not going to put a kid together who can't read together with a kid that has read 25 books in half an hour or something and say, you know, work together, unless there's actually a very clear developmental goal related to it, and then it's a conscious process. So sometimes we will have bigger age ranges, but then we'll have a specific assignment on how to deal with that. But it will never hold them back in their development. Questions? Otherwise we'll go to the last question, because I see people kind of taking off slowly. Yeah?
There's the flexible days, and there's also flexible hours, so that they can come as 10 and be later.
Yeah. The question is, you know, what is flexibility? In days, in hours, how does it work? Structurally, we're only flexible in days. We've got 15 days that we can divide up. Officially, we were aiming actually at presence registration. Just like in a company, you check in with your card, you check out, and that way we want to prove that at the end of the year you made your 960 hours that the Ministry of Education wants you to make. Not allowed. By law, we are obliged to have set times to start and set times to stop. And there's like a lot of limitations in that. So what we did manage to do is have the half-hour overlap. And that's also because some people said, you know, I've got some kids going to another school and some kids going to this school. So I'll need to be able to drop them off and then go to a different place. But this school starts at 8 and that at 8:30 or something. So we said, you can bring them in from 8 to 8:30. You don't have to pay childcare or daycare or whatever money. So that's the flexibility you have. The day runs until 2. That's a preset time. We are working on making it more flexible, but the question is whether we're going to be able to do that. Quick follow-up questions then?
What happens after 2?
What happens after 2? Daycare starts. So if your kid is signed up for daycare, then from 2 to 7 in the evening, he goes into daycare. But again, daycare is not as separate as it is now. If he wants to, he can continue with his tablet or with his project or with whatever he was doing. There will be workshops. Pretty much every day there will be something that they can select, and you can buy a package of violin lessons or piano lessons or dance lessons or whatever. So there will be set activities as well. But there will also be more of a daycare, just relax and spend time together under professional guidance, doing games or stuff like that.
How
Last.
Every day to 2, Wednesday and Friday as well.
Yeah, we've got a continuous roster. Every day is the same block. Yeah, and you can bring your kids from 7 to 7 if need be. So that's when daycare starts and daycare ends. Sorry? Yeah, the pickup and drop-off service. It's 90% certain, but it might be expensive. That's our challenge now. We're trying to find an affordable version, and we have discussions that lead to that, but we can't say it for certain. So it might be that we have to go to some commercial party that will offer it. No, we're actually looking at it now. If you check our website or keep signed up for our newsletter, or leave your email address here before you go, that's one of the things that will appear in the coming 2 weeks. It's a question we get a lot. So we're really focusing on getting it answered. Really last question then.
Even in Nederland stellen. Hoe doe je het aannamebeleid? Hoe controleren jullie bij de school waar het kind vandaan komt? Dus het onderwijsrapport?
Okay. The question is, how do you deal with, is it okay if I answer in English? Yeah. What is your acceptance policy and how does a procedure run? You fill in the form here. When you do that, you'll be called to check, are you really signing up your kid? If so, then we will go to the previous school and request the school report. We do look at that intelligently. We don't blindly look at it, and if some teacher just said your kid's ADHD, we're going to say, oh, it says so here, so we're not going to look at it. We're going to look at it in an intelligent way and discuss the contents with you to see if your kid is a fit with this school. But yes, we do request all the information from the previous school.
If one of the children is under average, is that a problem for you?
If the kid is under average, no, it's not a problem. We're going to guide him on the level that he or she is on. And I think I've yet to see a kid that's under average in everything. Usually there's a split thing when some things they're above average and some things they aren't. But in a regular school system, within no time they're under average in everything, because the school system doesn't accommodate to it. But yeah, no, of course, more than welcome, but we need to talk about your kids in specific, like what that... Yeah, dyslexia is one of the things that we definitely offer support in. Again, there's, and sometimes the kid gets a label, but there are some developmental processes that help a lot actually, and it's not as permanent as it always should be. Doesn't mean that we can always cure dyslexia, but there's more that can be done than most school things. Yeah. Okay, I want to thank you all so much for taking this time and listening to this long story with me talking at high speeds and not in perfect English. Thank you ever so much. Perhaps I'll see you next year in the school. Do take one of the forms, fill it out if you want to get a spot, and then we'll contact you. Take one of the cards and email us otherwise if you have any questions. Thank you so much and have a great evening. Thank you.